Welcome to the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in critical times. Here's your host, Bill Kelly.
Hi, and welcome to another edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in these critical times. I'm your host, Bill Kelly. It's great to have you with us today. We are moving in, of course, on the U.S. problems here that seem to be circumventing and in many, many ways influencing this Canadian election. And that changes on a pretty regular basis, too. Trump's on again, off again, tariff plans and threats about sovereignty and all these other things. Well, that reared its ugly head again just the other day during a press conference in Washington with the press secretary, the White House press secretary, who was one Caroline Leavitt. We've talked a lot about her and so have others over the last little while, but we'll put that aside for the time being. Anyway, when asked by a CBC reporter, actually, who was present at the media conference, Leavitt reinforced the fact that Donald Trump still thinks that Canada should be the 51st state of the United States of America. Now, of course, that was a big deal a few weeks ago before Justin Trudeau resigned. Remember, Trump used to refer to him as Governor Trudeau, Canada as you know, the 51st state, et cetera, et cetera. That seemed to change after Mark Carney took over the leadership and as the prime minister had a phone conversation with Donald Trump. Even as he was talking about that conversation, Trump referred to Carney as the prime minister, not as the governor, and talked about Canada and sovereignty. Hasn't softened his stance on tariffs yet, or has he? Because when you look at what's happened since then, there are a couple of things that have gone on. Yes, I know that he did put a pause on some of those arbitrary tariffs with other countries. And to hear Poilievre speak, well, nothing ever happened to Canada. Well, yeah, it did. There was a pause on those tariffs as well. And now there's some discussion this week, as we record this podcast, that there has been some serious discussions about actually maybe exempting parts of the auto parts elements of the auto manufacturing businesses, the cross-border stuff between Canada and the U.S. And that would be a positive step. So we're not sure just where that's going just yet, but there seems to be some movement there and some discussion that's going on. But I think the whole thing here about what the president is intimating and what the White House press secretary is talking about, I think reminds us of an overall problem. It's kind of been pushed to the side just a little bit now. But I think it's a stark reminder that, listen, even after this election and Canada moves forward with the new government that's going to be elected, the Trump threat is still going to be there. And I know Poilievre has basically criticized Mark Carney and say that he's hiding, which is a stupid claim to make. But anyway, and saying, look, you can't control Trump. All we can do is control our own economy. Well, that again, I think shows a certain naivety on Poilievre's part. Yeah, we want to be more self-sufficient with our economy. But at the same time, in this day, in this time, right now, we are still very much tied to the United States. So the Trump factor is going to be there. We can't just be oblivious to what Donald Trump is saying and doing and try to move our own economy forward. That takes time and it takes transitioning. And we know that Carney has already had some meetings with the European Union, with members of governments of France, the UK, Japan, and others to talk about those stronger alliances with other trading partners. And those trading deals already exist with those countries, but to further enhance those. So that's already underway. But it's in the meantime, you can't just ignore the fact that the U.S. economy is there and it's a threat. And as we mentioned in a previous podcast, it's not a new idea. Quick sidebar on this. One of my favorite authors, and I think one of the most famous Canadians of all time, is General Richard Romer, now retired, of course. General Romer is, I think, 100 years old now. You may have seen him in some of the Remembrance Day ceremonies at various times and various years. He's still there, shows up in uniform, and looks pretty good for a guy who's 100 years old. He is a decorated airman, of course, who actually flew missions around D-Day in Normandy. He's also, of course, after his service in the armed forces, of course, he was a political commentator, a political consultant for many governments, and an author, and a very good author, too. He's written a number of books, some of them just history books about the military and things of this nature, but others what we call, I guess, it's historical fiction. In other words, taking a historical event and writing fiction. In other words, putting a little meat on the bones about who said what and what might have happened behind closed doors, et cetera. And they're fascinating reading. One in particular that I really like that I think has kind of come back into vogue now because of what's gone on in the last little while, was a book called Death by Deficit. And like I say, it was a fiction, but the premise of the book was that the United States wanted to take over Canada's natural resources. And Canada was in debt, like most nations are these days. And okay, we'll cover the debt. We'll get you guys out of the red. But in the meantime, we have to have access to your natural resources. And it was basically the Canadian Prime Minister dealing with the U.S. President and how the negotiations, if you could use that term, actually took place. It's a great read. I don't know if it's still available, but when I talked to General Roman about that when the book came out, it was just fascinating to understand that. And he said, even though it's fiction, this could actually come to pass. Well, here we are in 2025, and you've got a U.S. president that wants our resources. Now, he hides it under the guise of, yeah, we want them to be the 51st state. But make no mistake about it, the premise behind that is that the United States has always been envious of our natural resources. And of course, the concern that we as Canadians should have, I think most of us do have, were that come to pass, and God forbid that it should, we would lose so many things that make Canada great, including our healthcare system, certainly, because you look at the fiasco of the U.S. healthcare system. We'd also lose our Canada pension plan. Now, let's not kid ourselves about that, because you watch what Trump is doing south of the border right now, essentially trying to dismantle the Social Security program, which is their equivalent of CPP, and basically saying, look, you're on your own. The government's not going to be there for you. Pretty scary stuff. But those are the sorts of things that we need to be concerned about. But as Roma wrote in his fictional book, Death by Deficit, now we're starting to realize and see that the valid threats that are going on here, they envy our natural resources. I mean, why would Trump want to negotiate a trade deal with Canada if he could simply move in here and take over? I mean, if Canada became part of the United States, and again, we're talking in the hypothetical, everything that they're envious of, our oil, our liquid natural gas, our potash, our lumber, certainly aluminum. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And most of all, our fresh water, which they very, very much would love to have in the United States. He wouldn't have to negotiate because it'd be theirs. That's the taking the shortcut and simply say, look at all the stuff that we've accrued now if Canada were to become part of the States. And again, it's not going to happen, and none of the leaders are suggesting it will. However, who we elect on this election in just a couple of days now is going to go a long way towards deciding just how we're going to negotiate and with whom we're going to negotiate to make sure that we maintain our sovereignty and maintain our hold on these wonderful natural resources that make Canada so great, which is why you have to be concerned about this. Poilievre simply said that, look, we can't control Trump, so we just have to let him do what he wants and sustain ourselves and grow our own economy. Well, that takes time. There has to be some negotiation and there has to be some dealing with Trump. And Carney, I think in a short time as prime minister before he called the election, and even after that, I think has shown that he has no problem standing up to Trump. He has no problem indicating that, look, Canada is going to be on its own 2 feet, and you will talk to us as a partner and as an equal, not as some subservient little country up to the north that just begs for stuff. I mean, the mischaracterizations that Trump has made about Canada being subsidized by the United States, it's all BS, total BS. But so many people down there will buy it, and I guess a few Canadians think so too. I mean, we already know as we record this podcast today, there is renewed interest, we're told, in separation agreements in Alberta right now, that if the Liberals get reelected, Danielle Smith says they're going to start looking for secession programs. Well, it's old news. And it's not at all surprising that Danielle Smith would want to talk about stuff like that. I mean, she's already got her mind set, and she's already showed, I think, where her priorities are. She's developed very close ties with the MAGA people down there, went down to Mar-a-Lago. You saw her photograph with Trump and with Kevin O'Leary. Don't get me started on Kevin O'Leary. She was at the inauguration, too. So, I mean, she would love nothing better than to maintain stronger ties with the United States, which is a topic for another day. But it's out there. It's another one of the factors, which is another reason why you have to have strong leadership in Ottawa because of the turmoil that's going to be caused by this Trump administration, which is not going away. And as we've reminded you on these podcasts in the past, even if something were to happen to Donald Trump, even if he were to just be gone someday for one reason or another, the MAGA movement is still there. And, there are not just J.D. Vance, who's the vice president, of course, but others in the Congress and others, and the money behind these sorts of things, too. It's a problem that not only is it not going away in the States, but there's pretty strong evidence right now that it's starting to move up north here and having an impact on the Canadian political scene with Maple MAGA and some of the things that Poilievre is proposing. So we have to be aware of that. And we have to make sure that we're going to elect people that are going to be strong for Canada. And not just now, but in the future. And yes, develop ties and trading organizations with Europe and with the UK and with Scandinavia and with the Eastern countries. That has to happen, of course. But at the same time, we can't ignore the United States. And we still have to have negotiations. We have to play tough, and we have to make sure that we are defending our own sovereignty in these situations. So that's all going to be part of it, and I think it's a very important part of it. And don't, like I say, just because we're not talking about it, I'm glad that the CBC reporter who was at that press conference at the White House the other day brought it up, because it reminds us that it's still a problem, and it's still going to be there. And once the dust settles on this election at the end of this month, we don't know what's going to happen with Trump next, because obviously he's got his mind set on this. And, we can only speculate about what his motivation is for this right now. Clearly, he's influenced by his hero, Vladimir Putin, who just decides, hey, I want Crimea, I'm going to move in and take Crimea. Well, do you want Ukraine? He's going to take Ukraine. Trump seems to have said, hey, I can do that too, which is why you've had discussions about the United States simply taking over Panama, taking over Greenland, and taking over Canada. There's got to be some strong leadership here to make sure that that doesn't happen, and that we maintain exactly what we're trying to do. It's a story that's going to continue for the next little while, and I think it's going to be very much on the minds of Canadians when they go to the polls. That's going to be the most important part of this election. Make your vote count. We've talked about this. The response that you've given us from these podcasts has been overwhelming, and we're very, very gratified about that. But this means nothing if we don't vote. That's the tool. This is our tool right here. We can do all sorts of discussion. We can have debates. We can throw stuff onto social media. We can do whatever you want. Any number of different things here. But the element here, the tool that we as voters have, as citizens of this country have, is our vote, and it's sacred to us, and we don't want to lose that. But at the same time, don't take it for granted. I don't know how many times I've read, and I'm sure you have too, regrets from people down in the States that say, "Oh God, I wish I'd voted." Because the voter turnout was pathetic in the last general election down there that reelected Donald Trump. And now they know that. A lot of people just stayed away for whatever reason, but they did. And that had a very profound effect on the result. We'd like to see voter turnout have a profound effect in this country too, but I mean in a positive way. So make sure that you exercise the privilege of voting and look at it not just as a privilege, but as an obligation as a citizen. More about that coming up later on. That's all that we have for today, this edition of the podcast. Of course, you can catch us on Substack, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. Of course, on YouTube. And if you're on YouTube, don't forget to hit the notification bell to make sure that we can spread the word on this. And on Blue Sky, getting a lot of response for that as well. And we invite you to be part of that, to join us, catch the live stream on YouTube channel, and support the show too by becoming a member, just buying a coffee or whatever you'd like to do there for just a couple of bucks a month. Of course, you'll have access to regular Q&As, early access to content, and lots more personal extras too. We also have started a merchandise line, swag, as it were, and check that out when you go to our page as well, and let us know what you think, and let us know if you got some ideas about how we can do that as well. We're having a great time with this, but the thing I find most gratifying about it is your input and the dialogue that we wanted to do and continue to do, not just during this election. This is an important time, but that responsibility to stay engaged goes long past the election, dealing with the government of the day and some of the very tough decisions and issues that they're going to have to deal with over the next little while. And we're not going anywhere. We're going to be here to talk about that with you and to get your feedback on that as well. Until next time, I'm Bill Kelly. Stay in touch and stay informed.
Bill Kelly Podcast brought to you by Wizen's Law, personal injury lawyers. Listen, you didn't choose to get injured, but you can choose the right lawyer. Wizen's Law, 905-522-1102 or wizenslaw.com.